a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, my guest today is an author. The name of his book is Backwoods Boy, and I'm really excited to find out more about it. Time to meet Richard Irving. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you. It's nice to be here, and it's nice to see you, Nancy. So what I'll do in the 25, 30 minutes we've got, I'll tell you a little bit about the book, why I wrote it, and if we have enough time, I'll even tell you one of the stories from it, but a short one.
Okay.
If that's okay. So the title of the book is Backwoods Boy, an illustrated memoir of growing up in New Brunswick in the 50s and 60s. And if you're interested, you can go to my website, rickwrites.ca, and it's got more information should you like it. But first question I was ever asked was, well, what's it about? And the short answer is it's about change. Because between 1947, when I was born, and 1967, when I left for Ottawa for my first job, things changed dramatically. We went from living in a farmhouse that didn't have running water, electricity, or indoor plumbing, to living in a house, which we'd had to rebuild. It was completely electrified. We had TV and everything. The roads were better. The whole economic infrastructure of New Brunswick had changed somewhat due to technology. So it's about change. But the other thing it's about, really, is about celebrating the lives of just ordinary Canadians. These are people who you're not going to see sitting in the front row of a meeting or on the stage. They're going to be sitting at the back, listening quietly, making up their minds about what they think. And they'll quietly go home and take care of their families and take care of their kids and do whatever they think is the right thing without any fanfare or applause or recognition, for that matter. And I thought it was kind of important to tell the stories of just regular people and get our oral history out there. And I was encouraged because I took a writing workshop at Humber College when I was starting the project, mainly to get me fired up. And I got a lot of very positive feedback. So I decided I'll write it. And of course, as I'm sure most of you know, you don't just write it. You write it, you hire a structural editor who looks at it and says, oh, I wouldn't do it that way. What you should do is this. And they edit it. And then you rewrite it and rewrite it. And I illustrated it myself. So I actually had advice from my drawing instructor. And then you hire a copy editor and do it, and a proper illustrator. So it's quite a process. And another time, perhaps we can talk about that.
Right.
But what I did was I structured a book. It is a memoir, but it's structured around a bunch of stories and some historical information that I pulled from various sources. And I thought, well, the timeline is boring. 1947, this happened. 1950, this happened. So I structured it around seasons. So there's some family history and stuff in there, but I structured it around spring renewal, where we're out planting and we're gardening. And in summer is summer abundance and working in the gardens and doing the farm work. Fall was fall frenzy, where we're desperately trying to get the hay in, get the garden harvested, get everything in before the frost hits. And winter is kind of recuperation when, we were still busy, but it was a time when we could kind of shut down, repair everything, and get on with our lives. So it was structured around the season. I think farm life still is structured around seasons. And so we have about 18 or 20 stories in there that illustrate, haying, working on the farm, hunting, all that kind of stuff. And I have one little story for you. It's called Riding a Pig. And Well, one morning, I was about 8 or 9. My mother calls me and says, Richard, I've got a job for you. Well, that was never a good thing most days. So well, what do you want, Mom? Well, I've got a pie and a casserole. I want you to take them up to Jim Steve's. I think he might appreciate them. Well, I was okay. I'm 8 or 9. I get to go out. It's about a 15-20 minute walk. So I felt pretty good. And Jim was an old guy who lived in a log cabin. He lived pretty much the way probably my great-grandfather lived. And I was kind of happy. Wow, away I go. So I've got the pie and I've got the casserole. My mother says, now you be sure not to drop that. Okay, Mom, I'll manage. Away I went. It's about 20-minute walk up the road. So we got up the road and then a path literally through the woods. Felt a little bit like Little Red Riding Hood without the hood. You go kind of trotting up, and eventually through the trees, I see the log cabin, which is on a level piece of ground near a brook. And I don't know if any of you know about Albert County, New Brunswick, but it's very hilly. Not as hilly as maybe where Nancy is, but we're pretty hilly nonetheless. So you approach, and what you see is a one-story log cabin, little smokestack going up, smoke coming out, fairly wide porch going the width of the cabin, and there's Jim sitting on the porch in some kind of armchair, smoking his pipe. And then off to the right, there's a corral of some kind. Couldn't really see what was in it. And then the brook. So I go sauntering up with my load. Jim says, hiya, Richard, what are you doing here? So, well, Mom thought you might like this pie and the casserole, so she sent me over. Well, that's just great. Come on in. So you go into the cabin through the front door, the only door. On the right, what you would see is a bed that was made out of split poles, probably birch logs or poles about, so big around, 2 or 3 inches, split in half, and nailed together somehow. On top of it was a mattress, which God knows what was in it, probably straw, and some blankets, which didn't smell none too clean. And over top of that, what looked like 3 sheepskins sewn together and some kind of a pillow. That was it. That was the bed. Right ahead was a big black cast iron stove, pot-bellied stove with a big fender where you could warm your feet. On top of the stove, kind of just steaming away, was a big cast iron kettle, big black kettle. Off on the right, a table made out of split logs, kind of roughly nailed together, and a couple of homemade chairs and cabinets. So Jim says, well, I'm going to store these. He puts everything in a cabinet, turns to me, says, well, son, come and sit and have a cup of tea with me on the porch. Well, I'm 8 or 9. That sounds pretty good. Now, the way they made tea is not the way we make tea. This big black cast iron kettle was probably 2/3 full of tea leaves. And he'd just keep adding tea leaves and water. And when there were so many tea leaves, you couldn't get enough water. And then he'd dump it and start the whole process over. So the tea kettle was probably about 3/4 full of tea leaves, been brewing for God knows how long. So when he poured it out into these mugs that were mostly clean, it was probably strong enough to peel paint. Thank God he took 2 heaping tablespoons of sugar and mixed them into each one. We take them out, we sit on the porch. So I said, well, Mr. Steves, that's pretty strong tea there. Yeah, I'll put hair in your chest, son. So we sipped that a bit. I looked over to the corral, and in it was the largest pig I have ever seen in my life. It was huge. So I said, well, Mr. Steves, because nobody called an adult by their first name in those days. That's some pig. He says, well, sir, I like to have enough pork to do me through the winter, so I grow them big right down here. I looked at it, I said, that pig is almost as big as a horse. He says, well, if you think it's as big as a horse, maybe you should try to ride it. I kind of looked at the pig, looked at Jim, And, with all the deep consideration of an 8 or 9-year-old, I thought I could do that. So I got up, took off my jacket, wandered over to the corral. The pig was rooting around, ignored me. Now, the pen was pretty dry. It wasn't mucky or anything, so that looked okay, but that was a big pig. So I crawled up over the corral fence. Pig ignored me, and I kind of slowly sauntered up to the pig. It ignored me. It was just rooting around. Well, I got up to it. It was about up to my waist. That was a big pig. I kind of think, well, this is a good idea. And then I looked at it, looked over at Jim, and again, I was 8 or 9 years old. I thought, yeah, piece of cake, no problem. So I kind of went around it a bit. Pig pretty much ignored me. What do? Couldn't figure out what to do, so I just jumped on its back, and you had to hang on to something. I grabbed its ears. Well, apparently pigs don't like that. So it started squealing like all the devils in hell had been cut loose and running around the pen. It went around about twice with me just hanging on for dear life and bouncing around. And then somehow it just stopped real suddenly and kicked its hind legs up. And I went over its head, flat on my back, right in front of it, knocked the wind out of me totally. And I'm laying there, and the pig is looking down at me, kind of disdainfully, like, what were you thinking? Well, I kind of got up, dusted myself off. The pig just looked at me. It took a little victory lap around the pen and went back to rooting. Totally ignored me. Up on the porch, Jim's just laughing fit to bust a gut. So I crawl over the fence, kind of shakily make my way up on the porch, pick up my cup of paint thinner tea, kind of look at Jim, and he says, well, son, that's why we don't ride pigs. The end. So that's one of the stories. There's a whole bunch in there. But I have a couple of questions for you and your audience to think about, and a challenge for people. The questions are very simple. During the period of 47 to 67, we had a tremendous amount of change. Just putting in electricity made a huge change in the way we lived, because you could have refrigeration and you could have TVs and other things. Improving the roads meant there was a lot of traffic. Well, that changed the social dynamics in our community because people were more mobile. Right. And because they were more mobile, well, people moved around more. So suddenly, people in the community would invest less energy in meeting a new person because they might be gone in 2 years. So it just changed the social dynamics. So the question is really, if you're thinking about things, what do you think are the major changes we're facing today? Some of them are obvious, but there's a lot of things that are changing that maybe aren't. So that's one thing for people just to consider. The challenge is very simple. I believe that everyone out there has a set of stories about their life, just regular things that happened. And I think it's important to document the lives of regular Canadians so that in the future, people will know how we lived. Mm-hmm. And I think also that understanding that helps us understand what it is to be human. So go out there, write down your stories. If you don't want to write them, tape them. Somebody else will write them down. But let's preserve them, because I think the future probably needs your stories and their use.
I've been working on mine for years. I grew up much like you in northern New Brunswick. We had a house and we had indoor. Not indoor plumbing, but we had cold running water. And my brothers, the older ones, remember when electricity was brought to the house. Yeah. But the change didn't happen until we moved from there to Montreal. It's like, whoa, a flush toilet. That was the best.
Kind of nice, particularly in the winter. Well, actually, the story documents some of the progress we made towards getting that. We put in a septic tank eventually. course, New Brunswick, the Earth's crust is right near the surface, so we had to dynamite a hole, put it in. There's a bit of story about that.
Right.
I made maple syrup just for fun, really, but in an old cast iron pot with a fire underneath, the way the old folks used to do it. Yeah. A lot of work. So we talk about that and haying and planting gardens and all the just regular, simple stuff that people did. So I'm not sure how much time we have left here, but that's a bit of an overview of the book.
We can keep talking until I'll get a warning from Zoom that we're running out of time.
Okay. All right.
That happens. So anyway, yeah, I just want to show if I can get a good picture of this. Oh, the light's not good. I'm trying to show the picture of your book. It's hard with the lighting. There we go.
The sketch on the cover is the house I grew up in.
Right.
So I did there's about 47 illustrations, and some of them are pictures. There's 13 of those, and I think there's about 35 sketches that I made, and there's kind of simple sketches to kind of illustrate what was going on. Mm-hmm. The process of self-publishing was kind of interesting, so we can maybe do a couple of minutes on that. Mm-hmm. I had checked with publishers and with agents and everyone, so you have to write proposals and you send it out, wait 6 months or more. And the rule of thumb is if you don't hear anything in 6 months, we're not interested. They don't get back to you very much. So I spent about a year fiddling with that. And I did get some feedback. Most of it was, yeah, it's an interesting story. It's kind of an interesting book, but we need to sell like 10 or 15,000 copies. So unless you can guarantee we can do that, we're not interested. And normally these kind of things in Canada, you sell 2,000 or 3,000 copies, unless you're Wayne Gretzky or
right, yeah,
something like that. So I decided to self-publish. And you got to be real careful. So the real money in self-publishing is not from publishing books. It's about running seminars, training people how to self-publish, or writing a book about self-publishing, or the self-publishing companies a lot of them are kind of vultures. You have to be very careful. So some of them will say, yeah, we'll self-publish and we'll do all this for you, do all the marketing. It's going to cost you $10,000. And from what I've heard, people aren't terribly satisfied with the results. If you're doing it yourself, it's probably going to cost you between $2,000 and $5,000. There's three things you can't skimp on. One is you need probably a structural editor early on. Somebody, when you've got a complete draft, you think, okay, I've got it figured out. They come in, they look at the structure of the book, and they give you advice on that. And they probably do some copy editing as well and indicate where things aren't clear and what you should do. And then you'll end up rewriting it and probably reorganizing it pretty substantially. The next step is after you've done that, and you've probably edited it yourself 3 to 5 times, you will hire a copy editor and kind of final edit. So they'll do copy edit, and they'll do a final prep, and then you're about ready to self-publish. And there's different ways to go about it. I worked with Draft to Digital, which is a company that will take your manuscript, they'll put it up in a proper format for Amazon and Kindle and Kobo and the others, and also it will be in a format so that people can get print on demand, so it'll be electronic, which is attractive. It's not a lot of work, but I hired somebody to format it because I had a lot of illustrations, and ebooks don't like illustrations because you can change the font. So if you increase the font, the illustrations will kind of flow through the text, but you'll still get these odd things where You'll have an illustration at the bottom of the page, the legend on the next page, nothing else, and then the text will continue. Change the size of the font, everything looks perfect. So technically, it's a little complicated, but it's doable. You hire somebody who will do that. You need to hire a good illustrator to design a cover, because a cover is probably what sells the book. I was pretty happy with my illustrator, but it cost me $1,200.
Right.
Wasn't cheap. And I will say the two editors I hired, each about $900. That's kind of the going rate for anybody who's competent. And you can spend $900 and get somebody that isn't competent too. So if you're not comfortable, just cut them off and get somebody else. Once that's done, then you have to make a big decision. What else are you going to do? And I chose to go to a printer in Toronto who will print both hardcover and softcover. Most people want paperback or trade books as opposed to hardcover ones. And you have to decide what size your book's going to be. Now, I chose, I think it's 6x9 or something as a standard. It's a little bigger than a small paperback, but it's not huge. It's comfortable to hold. And I got them printed up. And then I set up a website. Well, I hired a guy who designed the website for me, rickwrites.ca. And you have to have electronic payment and stuff. So you get a little store set up, as I'm sure you know, Nancy. And then you're off to the races, except you got to promote. Right. So how do you promote? Well, I chose several things. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and I am on LinkedIn. So I put notices that Backwoods Boy was coming on these sites. And then when it was out, I put something up. So we can go to the site to buy it. You can buy ebooks. And then I decided, I hope it was a good idea, to do a tour of independent bookstores. So for the last 10 days or so, I've got another 5 or 6 days to go. I'm driving around to independent bookstores in Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, and just cold calling, going in and say, hi, I'm Rick Irving, got a book, here's the information. And I'll take a couple or 2, 3, 4 on consignment. I ran an author night at the local museum in Hillsborough, New Brunswick, had about 25 people. And I think I sold about 30 books because they're local. You know, they know me, they know the family. Yeah. And oddly enough, my landlady at the Paradise on the Hill B&B in Stony Creek, just north of Hillsborough, she bought 2, one for herself and one for her mother or somebody. And then she thought, well, no, I want another 8. I'm going to sell them to customers. So she bought a bunch, which was kind of nice. And lately, I've just come back from Nova Scotia, and this afternoon, I spent 3 hours at the Chapters in Moncton doing an author table. We sold about 17 or 18, and they took another 30 or so. Right. But it takes a long time. So next summer, I will come down and I'll be doing author signings because I've made contacts with all these people. And probably take about 3 years to break even. So if you want to get rich quick, go be a greeter at Walmart. You'll make more money more quickly. But if you have a story to tell, you have something you want people to hear, by all means, do it.
Yeah. Everybody's got, I'm like you, this is why I do interviews. Everybody has a story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I love the whole concept. I mean, not the traveling and self-promoting. I would find that very difficult for myself, you know.
Yeah.
But I more and more people I know are self-publishing, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of people are. The woman who helped me self-publish she was also my editor, my final editor, Ashley LaChance, who is this kind of cherubic young woman about, mid to late 20s, who writes Gothic horror or fantasy horror. Pardon me, she does not look like a horror writer, but She does a and she's out promoting. She also does a lot of editing and stuff too. Because the problem is with most of the publishing, you have to assume that you're probably not going to make any real money at it.
Right.
So you do it because you love it. You may make some money eventually, but boy, you better not bet the farm on that, because it's not likely to happen.
Right.
But you meet a lot of nice people. Book people are fun people. Like the owners of these bookstores, most of them are just, even if they don't want to take the book because they're overstocked or it doesn't fit what they sell, they're very warm and tend to be very inviting and are happy to chat with you. There's a danger. And if you are a person like me who reads a lot, you tend to buy books. So you go into one of these stores and they've taken 5 of your books and you come out with 3 or 4 books that you bought. That's not a way to get rich quick.
Kind of defeats your purpose there, right?
It kind of defeats the purpose, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we're meeting nice people and
yeah.
friendly, enthusiastic folks.
Yeah. That's pretty cool. I do like the idea of doing it. I've met I've interviewed a number of people who self-published and a lot of them don't talk about the numbers because again, it's like they got their book up there, which is what they wanted to do, right?
Yeah, you've had something to say. I will say though that I've seen some people have done it on the cheap and they had a friend edit it or something. Okay. And the results usually aren't great.
Right.
It's too bad if they have a good story and it's not properly edited. Yeah. They're not going to get the kind of response they really should be getting.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense for sure. So tell me about. I want to go back to your life a little bit. What part of New Brunswick was that? Where you were?
Okay. Well, I grew up in Albert County, which is New Brunswick, and it's just across the Petitcodiac River from Moncton, New Brunswick. So it's down in the kind of southwest a little bit, I guess.
Okay.
And the community I grew up in was, I guess, well, not exactly founded, but it was settled by my great-great-grandfather, who had lived in Hillsborough, ran coastal schooners for a while. And then he went inland and got a big land grant. So they were farmers. My great-great-grandfather was my great-grandfather was a farmer and a local minister who built the local church. So it was a small rural community, mainly farmers and lumber folks, because we had about 400 acres. So we cut some logs and cut firewood, of course, like most people in Brunswick.
Yes.
And did a bit of farming, hunting in the fall, trapping, one-room country schools. I don't know, did you go to a one-room country school?
No, there was a girls' academy.
Okay.
Well, French and English. So I did a couple of years in English. Then we moved to Montreal. So.
Okay, so you probably in French up there, were you? Or
well, we went to English school. My father was French. My mother spoke English, so we spoke English.
Yeah. Well, Albert County is almost all English for some reason. The one-room country schools. My teacher for 7 of 8 years lived in the community. She was married to a cousin of my father's, and she was one of my mother's best friends, which was great for my mother. Kind of sucked for me.
Sorry, we're getting a notice that I'm getting the notice that we're going to be out of time soon.
Okay. I'll just quickly say that I was very happy with my experience in the one-room country schools because there were like 12 kids, even if they were in 8 grades. And as long as you had a good teacher, things went well. Occasionally you get somebody who shouldn't have been in the classroom, and then you had a lot of problems.
For sure, yeah. Well, we're going to end it there because Zoom will just cut us off, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to stay on camera. So to the audience, you've been listening to Richard Irving, and again, his book is on sale, Backwoods Boy. You can find it on Amazon. And if you're in New Brunswick, look at some of the stores where you have small stores.
Or just go to my website, rick.ca, and you can purchase the book for me, and I'll mail you a copy.
There you go. All right. Thank you for watching the show. I hope you can continue to do so. Take care, everybody, and peace out.
A sense of community, Chilliwack's a place to be. A sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.